Hey everybody, welcome to the Hey Everybody podcast. You can tell you're here because I said hey everybody at the beginning. This is episode 38 if I'm not mistaken, and it doesn't matter if I am mistaken. It is whatever episode it is. And if you're going to get hung up on the number, then you have not been paying attention to the vibe of this whole thing. I hope you guys are doing good. I'm doing good. I had an interesting week, and we'll get to all that. Isn't it funny how your impulse is to go, I had a good week, and then you start thinking about like the stories you're about to tell and go like, it probably might not be an accurate label to say I had a good week. But good things happen this week, and other things happen this week, and we have gathered here today to talk about them. One of the ways I've been spending my time in the last week, maybe even 2 weeks, is reading this book called How to Be Good by Nick Hornby. Nick Hornby wrote About a Boy, and he wrote High Fidelity, which were both made into really good movies. He also wrote Long Way Down and Juliet Naked, which are two of my favorite books, and were also made into movies, though I think less successfully. Like, fewer people know about those two movies. I think Juliet Naked is a phenomenal movie. And Long Way Down was a little, iffy, but I would recommend it if you have the time. What's interesting about the process of reading this book, though, is I don't feel about it the way I have felt about any other Nick Hornby book. Most of his stuff, I blast through it in like a day or two, and I love it the whole time. And it's funny, and it's kind of stirring and deep and witty and great. And this one, How to Be Good, I'm having to work my way through a little bit. And it's not a bad book, and it's just the bar that Nick Hornby had set for himself in my mind was really, really high. And now it's sort of suffering from that thing where, if there's a band you love and they put out kind of an iffy record, but if anybody else put out that record, it would be their best record. It's just that this band previously had operated at such a high level that even good stuff can kind of fall short of that, at least to us. But it's been a great opportunity to sort of practice this thing I believe in, which is the artist-fan relationship is a relationship. And in a relationship, each side has certain responsibilities and has to invest a certain amount. And the older I get, the more I realize that and benefit from it. Like there's been a handful of records that came out by artists who have made records that I adored, and then they put out a record that I don't like very much. And some of the most like venomous reactions to art come from people that feel let down by the art because previously they loved what this person put out, right? So I love this band. They mean the world to me. They've put out 3, 4, 5 records that like changed my life and live somewhere deep within my soul, and I just love them. And then they put out a record that's just fine, but I hate it because I come to this band to get my world changed and my life saved, and I believe they have dropped the ball. But what I've learned as I get older is if I have gotten so much from this band already, or this author, or this filmmaker, maybe they've earned my faith a little bit. And I listen to that record again, and then again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, until in a lot of instances, it starts to make sense to me, and I kind of start to get it. And then when you start to like it, maybe you start to really like it because you sort of worked for it a little bit, and you spent a lot of time with it, and you feel that feeling of relief that like I was kind of worried that maybe my relationship with this band was over, but now I know it's not, and that's really exciting. And I just kept telling myself, or I keep telling myself as I read this book, that Nick Hornby has been responsible for hours and hours and hours and hours of joy in my life. And that has earned him 300 pages to maybe not blow me away, but I still have faith that like by the end of this thing, it might be my new favorite Nick Hornby book. And the fact that I didn't get it right away sort of makes it mean more to me. Or it could be my least favorite Nick Hornby book. But a couple things. One, that don't mean it's bad. We get too hung up on the inherent goodness or badness of a thing being related to whether or not we like it. And who am I to say if something's good or bad, I can't even really say if I like something or not, because there have been things I have loved and things I have hated in the past, and in the present, I feel the opposite way. I love things I hated, and I kind of hate things I loved, and I know that in the future, it might flip again, or it might, stay the same. I might, who knows? But I do think it's interesting to think about our relationship with the art we love as an actual relationship that we have a bit of a responsibility for. And it certainly, you get more out of it in the long run. The things you invest in are the only things that can ever pay off, right? I think that's a stock analogy, believe it or not. I don't know a ton about financial planning. I also think about, as live music starts to come back, I keep hearing about how the venues are going to be different, and the show is going to be different, and the bands are going to behave differently. And I'm not reading a ton about the ways in which 13, 14 or more months of no live music should change the listener or the audience. And I have these probably destined to be unfulfilled high hopes that people are going to come out of this having really reevaluated how they take in live music. And even selfishly, do they approach live music in the way that is guaranteed to get them the most out of it? And that's probably a longer conversation for another day, but I do hope that people come back to live music with a greater appreciation and a greater awareness of what they bring to the process and what impact they have on how the show goes. And maybe we'll talk about that longer someday. But in the meantime, speaking of live music, we watched another live stream last night. It was a great bluegrass performance. Guitar player named Jordan Tice, a fiddle player named Christian Settlemeyer, and a mandolin player who we've talked about here named Andrew Marlin. He's in Mandolin Orange. And it was great. They did some traditional stuff, a lot of instrumental stuff, and it was live streamed from the Station Inn in Nashville, which is like a legendary kind of bluegrass. It's a venue, but it's more like a bar with a stage in it, and it's perfect in that way. Like, that's kind of what I like in a venue. And having been there before, it was cool to watch a show live streamed from there and kind of be able to better understand what it's like in that room and that kind of thing. But it was great. And all three of those guys have put out records that I've enjoyed quite a bit, particularly the instrumental stuff. I've been listening to a lot of instrumental stuff lately. In part because I just think there's already so many words out in the world. And sometimes you just need a break. I realize that in the moments that I feel burned out on music, I'm really burned out on language. I love language. I love writing. I love talking. I love singing. I love having conversations and podcasts and all that stuff. But it's also one of those things that people misuse and they squander and they undervalue and they devalue. And sometimes you just need a break. And one of my favorite things about the show was, especially Christian, when they did one of his songs, he would tell you what it was about. And I love that because I think a lot of times we hear instrumental music and it doesn't really occur to us that it could be about something. We might think like, oh, he probably wrote this in a certain time and place and maybe he has a feeling about it. But I love the idea that like an instrumental can have as much of a narrative, especially to the writer, as any, bit of art that maybe actually has language in it. So I really liked that, and I enjoyed it, and it was a nice way to spend a Sunday night, and it was a good end to a week that, like I said earlier, wasn't purely good, you know. I'm an American like everybody else, and I see the news like everybody else. So I know there's been some shootings lately, and that's, I don't know what to say about that. I don't have the words for that. But particularly, one of the downsides about being a human being is that certain things affect us more than other things. That's just a fact. It's a reality of the condition, but it's not great. Though they've done studies that obviously you'd be debilitated if you felt the same level of compassion and empathy for every human being that you do for your child. And they've done studies that say, hypothetically, I'm just kind of summarizing some stuff I've read, but they say, if you tell people, you know, there's 200 million starving children on the planet, they go, oh, geez, that's terrible. We don't know what to do about that. But if you tell them there's 5 starving kids in your neighborhood, most people immediately go like, okay, well, let's fix that. Let's round up some food. Let's get some money together. Let's feed these kids. So maybe the secret to turning that into a positive, the fact that you feel differently about different things, is finding those things you feel differently about and acting on them. I don't know. But for me, that meant one of the shootings that happened. What a terrible thing to say. One of the shootings. Ugh. But here we are. One of the recent shootings took place in Boulder, Colorado, and it took place at a store that I've been to quite a few times. My dad lived in Colorado my whole life, and nearly all of that in Boulder. And I'm looking at the news at this place that in so many ways represented like a safe place for me. Like I've always loved Colorado, and in my childhood, being with my dad was markedly different than the rest of my life. And I always viewed it as a literal and metaphorical kind of safe place. And now I'm looking at these terrible scenes coming out of a place that I used to buy comic books, and I used to, you know, go shopping with my dad for dinner and that kind of thing. And I was just sort of struck by the reality that has always been, which is that kind of anywhere at any time by any means, your safety and security can get snatched away from you, and maybe ever thinking that there's a safe space is kind of an illusion, a necessary one, but is kind of an illusion. And I tell you this to tell you this. I'm having all these feelings, these personal feelings, frankly, and I'm watching the politicians do what the politicians do, which is always the same. And they immediately go to their particular corners, and the bell rings, and here we go, and it's on, and the left is fighting with the right, and Lord knows there's a side I align with more. But the thing I think they have in common, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but the thing I think they have in common is that they weren't feeling not even what I was feeling. They certainly weren't feeling what people who lost someone that day were feeling. And I don't think they were trying to. I don't think that they tried to. I mean, the fact is, we live in a country where after Sandy Hook, the president was talking about it, and he cried because he's a human being, and that's what you should do. And he was mocked by people who still have TV shows. And just the exhaustion of that cycle of this terrible thing happens, and the people that we have charged with fixing it and looking after these things, they're not even connected to it the same way we are, and they're not even really threatened by it the same way we are, because they live different lives in different places in wholly different ways. And I just felt that old familiar exhaustion, like, yeah, they're saying that, which I've heard before, and then they're going to respond with that. Yep, I've heard that before, and it just seemed like people doing a job, and I have very little use for that, frankly. I have very little use for any stance or opinion that doesn't take into great consideration empathy for the people around you, and particularly the people that will be affected by those positions and stances and decisions. So that was a weird part of the week. And then the other weird part, by the way, talking about politicians, let's get this out there. Stop texting me. I have never in my life given my phone number to a politician or given my permission for them to text me, but they do. And it's just this accepted part of the world, part of life now, or American life at least. And I hate it. I'm so sick of it. I don't care what you're pushing or selling. It's the same thing with telemarketers. Like, talking about safe spaces, you can't even come home and get away from people beating you over the head with what you should think and what you should buy and what you should need and how you should feel. And I think it's important to vote, and I have a flawless record of voting Democrat, even sometimes while holding my nose. Just because I do think if we, very rarely do I think it is the lesser of two evils, but even if it is, pick the lesser of two evils. Why wouldn't you? But I dream about a world where, like, I feel free enough to just go, I'm not going to vote for that person because they texted me while I was trying to spend time with my son. So the hell with them. Anyways, the other thing of note that happened, which I'm still I haven't thought about since it happened, and now thinking about it, there's a bunch of ruckus outside right now. Not a bunch of ruckus, a ruckus. You can't have a bunch of ruckus. See, people devalue the language, even myself. There is a ruckus outside. But thinking about this story now, thinking I'll talk about it on the podcast, and thinking about it again, it stirred up a bunch of feelings that I wasn't really quite aware I had about it. So my wife and I, we try to take a walk every day just to be together and talk and be outside and get a little exercise and all this stuff. And we're taking our walk through our neighborhood. And at this point, we're like equidistant from an elementary school, a park, and an old folks home. Just to give you the kind of feel for, again, we're talking about safe spaces. It's like 3:30 in the afternoon, the sun's out, and a regular neighborhood, like any other kind of neighborhood you might see. And we're walking down the sidewalk, and I guess there's a guy coming. I'm sort of like staring off at a squirrel or something, as is my way. And my wife says, "Oh, let's cross the street. There's a guy coming," and maybe she was getting kind of a vibe from him. So I said, "Yeah, okay." And we would have crossed the street anyways because there's a pandemic and sidewalks are narrow. So even if there wasn't a pandemic and there's two of us going this way and one of you going that way, we aren't all going to fit on the sidewalk. So we crossed the street like straight, and this guy crosses the street as well, but at an angle very quickly. And in like no time flat, he has closed the gap between us, and he says, "Which way are you going?" Which is a stupid question because you know which way we're going. And I say, "We're going this way." And he goes, "Well, me too." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "You got some coffee there?" And I didn't say anything. And at this point, it's clear, like, something's going on here. So I just kind of gently, I kind of nudge my wife to continue walking, and I stop. And then the guy kind of passes, and now I've positioned myself in between guy and my wife. And he stares at me And you can just tell that, like, he's aggressive, and I'll tidy up the language here. He asks what exactly I might be looking at. And I have a million thoughts go through my head all at once. One is that I don't like this. I don't like aggression and even potential violence, and I don't like any of it. I'm just not into it. I've never been into it. I've never been like, I'm a tough guy and you're a tough guy and let's fight. I'm not, terrible. And I'm thinking, you know, there's something up with this dude. One, I can't really gauge his age, but he has a backpack on. So I'm thinking, you know, is this like a 15-year-old kid who's kind of bigger? Because I sure don't want to get into fisticuffs with a child. I'm thinking, I got 6 inches and at least 50 pounds on this guy, and he's being real aggressive. So does that mean he knows something I don't know? Like he's got a weapon? Or does that mean that maybe he's in the throes of some kind of mental or emotional situation? And in either case, I don't want to, you know, it's not going to feel good. I'm not feeling a lot of fear, but I don't want to fight this guy. I don't want to fight a guy like me. I certainly don't want to fight a guy that, like, maybe he's young, maybe he's having some kind of mental issue. I don't know. So I just look at him and I say, he says, what are you looking at? And I say, I'm just making sure everything's cool, man. Have a good day. And there's a little pause. And in my head, I'm also thinking, you know, at a certain point, it's not going to matter what I want. My wife's here, and this is not going to be a problem. I'm not going to let it be a problem. You know, I don't know what you're looking for, but there's a very good chance you may have accidentally found it. So he kind of eyeballs me and looks me up and down, and I just stare at him. And then he turns and walks away, and I wait a beat because I'm not that interested in turning my back on this dude. And then I turn, and my wife and I start walking to the end of the block. And this happened like in the middle of a block. So we get to the end of the block when he gets to the other end of the block. And from a full block away, this is when he turns and just starts screaming at me and saying terrible things. And I, you know, we just ignored it and continued on our way. And we went down the next block, and as we were crossing the street, we could see him crossing the street, and my wife wasn't terribly comfortable with that. So we took a different route home. And the upside is, on our different route home, I found a credit card on the ground and bought a new guitar. No. I found a credit card on the ground, and we called the bank and brought it back to the bank. And maybe someone was having a terrible day because they lost their credit card. And because I had this interaction with this dude, this person got their credit card back. And that's cool, right? Right. Let's find the good. But it just sucked, you know? It sucked. I don't like having those interactions. And it's not like I was afraid. It's not even like my wife was afraid, because I think in part because I was there, and I think she knows, like, you know, I believe in pacifism to a point, but nothing's going to happen to her while I'm around. That's just a fact. And I just felt bad. I felt bad for this person that no matter how you slice it, this person's hurting in some way. They're going through something. I felt annoyed that I had to deal with it, and that for the next few days now, when we go out, we're like, are we going to bump into this guy again? That kind of thing. I felt that feeling when you get reminded, like, there's all kinds of stuff in you, man. Like, you talk about your philosophy and your poetry and your whatever, but there was a real part of you that's like, I just want to thump this dude. Like, who is this guy who thinks he can talk to me like this, who thinks he can make my wife uncomfortable? Like, and I don't like that part of myself. So it was a real complicated situation, and it ended the best way it could have, which I was pleased with. And I also got to see that part of myself. I got to see, like, the part of me that could have ended that situation differently and probably even quicker, and decided not to, and knows that violence is not the way, and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, I think what I feel the most is just frustrated about the world I live in and the people in it and what they're going through and the reactions that we're all having to each other, and just feel frustrated and kind of tired. And for that reason, and one other reason, I'm going to play you a brand new song today. The other reason is it's very windy and our screen door is slamming. And the first line of the song is about a screen door slamming because I wrote this song maybe 2 weeks ago when it was also very windy outside. The song is called Freddie Nichi's Intergalactic Jubilee. I'm sure someday it'll just be called Screen Door, but for now I get a great deal of pleasure out of calling it Freddie Nichi's Intergalactic Jubilee. And it's about, there's this concept in most philosophy and most religion and most thought that things are just happening the way they've always happened. There's nothing new under the sun, that kind of thing. Nietzsche calls it the eternal return. And he, I believe, uses it as more of like a thought exercise. Like, what if your life was just going to repeat over and over again in the exact same way? And I think that's a way of encouraging people to like make sure you live the kind of life that wouldn't be the worst thing. Love some people and have some fun and do some good and that kind of thing. But it's a fascinating thing to think about, this idea that like maybe even like emotionally and intellectually there is nothing really new under the sun. Obviously we're all having new experiences every day and different experiences, but I think the reason humans connect with each other is because our lives really aren't that different. And even if you hear that door? Even if our circumstances and situations are different, our thoughts about them are similar, our feelings about them are similar, our reactions to them are similar, that kind of thing. So I wrote this song about that line of thought. And sometimes when I think about that, I think, good, I'd go for round after round after round of a life with my wife and my son and making music and talking to y'all and that kind of thing. And then other times I think like, I'm going to have to bump into that guy infinity more times and have that exact same interaction. And I'm going to have to watch this news report infinity more times. And you do feel this kind of, the quickest way to identify the parts of life you don't like are to imagine having to do them again forever. Which is why it's a good thought experiment. So this is called Freddie Nichi's Intergalactic Jubilee, and I know it's pronounced Nietzsche, but in the context of this song title, it sounds better to say Nichi. And I'm an artist. That was Jack Nicholson. If you can tell me which movie, I'll give you a free book or something. Here we go. Screen door slamming in the wind, but not much else has changed. There ain't nothing new on that breeze, everything's the same. I thought I woke up feeling different, with my circumstance to blame. Everything that's happening is just happening again. Well, maybe time is a flat circle that just keeps going round. Maybe it's all a field of flame that never quite burns down. And maybe we're just dancers waiting to hit the ground. Well, I don't know the song, but I know the sound. If the universe only expands and it's moving away from me, something I don't understand but know how to repeat. It brings me a little comfort, it brings me a little relief, knowing that that I ain't at the center of anything. Maybe time is a flat circle that just keeps going round. Maybe it's all a field of flame that never quite burns down. And maybe we're just dancers waiting to hit the ground. Well, I don't know the song, but I know the sound. I don't know the song, but I know the sound. All right. It's fun to bust out a brand new one now and then. And one of the upsides of being an independent DIY nobody from nowhere is that I can just do whatever I want. And I think when that song eventually comes out, it'll be in a much different form, because I think the next thing we're going to work on is some stuff with the band, and things tend to get louder with the band and that kind of thing. We're running a bit long, so let's do some recommendations and get you out of here. First up, Will Johnson. This record is called Wire Mountain. Will Johnson is a busy dude down there in Texas. He's making records. He's in several bands. He plays drums for a bunch of people. He paints. He just put out his first novel, which I have here somewhere that I'm very excited to read. And he's great. And what's really fun about him is that oftentimes his music is fairly hard to explain. Not that it's weird. It's just, it's not twangy, but there's something there. And it's not dusty, but there's something there. And it's not spacey and ethereal, but it kind of is. And it's just a lot of things that I like in a mixture that I don't often encounter. And I was trying to think how to explain this particular record, and I was struggling. And I picked it up and I realized it sounds like this. If you look at this album cover, you know, there's some signs of life, but nothing's moving at the moment, and it's kind of dusty, but there's some green in the background, and there's a big mountain, and then kind of an open sky, but it's kind of gray, and that's what this record sounds like. And you get some instrumental stuff and then a bunch of songs. And check out Cornelius, just because I think it's probably the most catchy. And it might do that thing where you hear it and maybe it doesn't grab you right away. I think it will. But if it doesn't, I think it'll come back to you a few times. And then maybe you'll dive into some Will Johnson. And I hope you do, because I think he's great. And then this band is called The Forecast. This record is called Everybody Left. The Forecast is somewhat less active now, but they are from Illinois, and they do, again, kind of twangy, but not very twangy, very like Midwestern kind of rock with like, they might hate this, but like some of that Midwestern emo kind of vibe in some of the guitars and that kind of thing. Their bass player sings all the backup vocals and sometimes takes whole chunks herself. And she has this amazing, wonderful, powerful voice that my wife and I just adore. So listen to Skyline by The Forecast and check it out. And I think if you like this podcast and you like the stuff I recommended in the past, you will like one of those records. And read some Nick Hornby stuff. I still think my favorite is Juliet Naked, and the movie's really good as well. And lose all that anger and tightness and hate and stress and that kind of thing, so that when you encounter it in other people, hopefully you can just kind of feel bad for them and wish they could do what you have done. It's not good for you. Like, even if you want to be selfish about it. And you know, as for the rest of it, I think we have to feel the rest of it if we ever are going to have a decent idea about how to fix it. I don't think we can look away from the tragedies in the world, because I think our exposure to them is what will hopefully one day spark that idea that puts it to bed. But in the meantime, don't shoot people and don't hit people and don't be all aggressive and weird. Just relax, be cool. You know, I use this example all the time. I'm a huge Johnny Cash fan, and I've been listening to Johnny Cash for probably 20 years. And I know there are at least 50 Johnny Cash songs I've never heard. And it's true for you too. So go find a Johnny Cash song you've never heard. Don't trouble yourself with all this other stuff. It's just going to cause you pain. What other people should be doing and what they should be believing and how they should be voting and that kind of stuff. That's all out of your control a little bit. Unless, you know, if you're coming from a positive place, I do think it's okay to try to help people see the world differently and that kind of thing. But if it's just tying you up and getting you all clenched, let it go for a little bit and see if when you come back to it, it feels less important, because it probably will. And in the meantime, I hope this wasn't too rambly and long. I hope it didn't come apart at the end. I think it might have. Like I said, I feel kind of like a weight about some of the things that happened this week. It's not necessarily sadness. It's just like, you know, when you're reminded that, like, the world isn't, you know, running smoothly all the time, and it's not good all the time. And but I was happy to be able to talk to you guys, and it helped me, and I hope it helps you. Thanks for all the messages and all the support, and I'll see you next week. Be good, do good. Bye.